Hey everyone, welcome to another $1,000 strap search. I've got my $1,000 in singles here and I'm about to show you what I found. But before I do, let's talk about this week's tip. Now, I love collecting errors. Errors to me are fascinating, but we have to understand what is an error, what counts as an error, and what makes it valuable. The first thing is that an error has to be something that the BEP will remove from circulation. Okay. If there is something wrong with a note and it fits within the BEP's guidelines, they're going to ship it out and they're not going to worry about it, which means every time it happens, it goes through. Whereas an actual error gets pulled, meaning it could happen a million times, but they pull every single one of them. And what makes those rare is the times that they miss those. If you want to have an idea about how many times there are errors on notes, all you have to do is look at a print run size of star notes, because that's what star notes are. Star notes are the replacements for errors. So think about that. The actual genuine errors and mistakes that are done at the BEP, there are so many of them that there are literally millions and millions of star notes printed every single year, or at least up until this year. Those are the notes to replace the errors. So for an error to get out, that's a big deal. Now, when you talk about notes that are slightly off center, well, they don't pull those. And if there are millions of notes that have drips on them or ink smears or stuff like that, how many notes do you think are off center that the BEP doesn't care about? I would say there's even more of those. So if there are more off center notes than there are replacement notes, for example, that means there are more off center notes than there are every single other type of error ever for every print run, and they don't pull those. So when you're trying to compare errors versus things that you find in circulation, no, there is no comparison. Like I said, every star note represents an error of one type or another that was pulled. And since they don't pull the minor things, that gives you an idea. How often do you find off-center notes compared to stars? So don't get hung up on the minor details like that. If an error is not listed in one of the error catalogs, it's probably not worth anything. All right, so let's get started with what I found this week. Let's scoot these out of the way. Starting off, I found a note that's pink, so clearly this is an error. Clearly this is a printing error, right? No, this is a note that somebody spilled juice on. How do I know that? To start with, the ink that's used isn't pink. They use black and green. Those are the two colors that they use for ink. They don't use red or pink or anything else like that, so this is clearly not an error. Now, the other giveaway is that even when there is an ink smear on here, that ink smear does not go through the note. And this clearly goes through. The reason for that is they use an oil-based ink for the printing, and Kool-Aid is clearly water-based. So no, when you find a note like this, I'm not going to lick it, but I'm pretty sure that's just Kool-Aid. All right, so what else do we got in here? Here's some trinaries, 4s, 5s, and 8s. 3s, 5s, and 8s on this one, 0s, 7s, and 8s here, 2s, 3s, and 4s, 1s, 2s, and 8s, 0s, 5s, and 3s, and some quads, quad 2s, quad 4s, quad 6s, quad 8s, and some stars. 2017A star note, always check to see if they're filled. 2013B, it's not in the range, it's too high. You want 096 and lower until you get to 032, so it's not a duplicate. Some of the older notes I found, I saved stuff that's 20 years and older. Here's a 2003A, probably going to go away. Same with this one, 2003A in rough shape, another one in rough shape, but it gives you an idea of how many I find out of 1,000. 2003A here, another 2003A, 2001, also in rough shape, 2001, all kinds of staining on it. A nicer 2001, that might be a keeper. 1999, 1995, not a web note. And 1988A, also not a web note. And the oldest note I found was from 1997. So those were my finds this week. What did I pull out? Well, this was a recent pickup for me. You guys know I really like old 50s. Old 50s, they have a very cool look to them, and they were one of the lower print runs of notes to be made. So if you wanted to collect older notes that wouldn't seem to have a whole lot of extra value, a 50 is a good place to start. This is an Frbn, a Federal Reserve banknote. That means that the actual Federal Reserve Bank, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, was the one to back this note. You can see here it's dated series of 1929. I don't know if this is, I don't think this is a major deal here, but the series is printed a little bit higher, and it actually goes into the portion that says by like deposit. But if we read the entire note, it says national currency, secured by United States bonds deposited with the Treasury of the United States of America or by like deposit of other securities, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, New York will pay to the bearer on demand $50. And then it goes into the obligation over here, redeemable in lawful money of the United States at United States Treasury at the bank of issue, which would be the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Now, they use the same symbols as our regular one. New York would be District 2, and it would be B, and you can see that it has the B on there like that. This particular note from this side clearly looks different. You have the brown seal, the brown letters here, but from the back, it looks just like a regular $50 bill. So if you're ever counting your notes this way, you would never notice anything different about this note. It's still worth $50 today. It was worth $50 back then. You could spend it as $50 just like any other $50 bill. So when you think about it, it was more of an accounting thing as far as why there were all the different things. You didn't really care if it was a legal tender or a Federal Reserve note or an Frbn or a silver certificate. You just knew it was $50. It was up to the government to sort out which way this money was backed and why it was worth what it was. But that was in 1929. This is clearly a collectible now, and let's take a look at the book and see what it has to say. I've got, always got to show the cover, Paper Money of the United States, because you guys always want to know what book I use. That's the book there. And let's find that Federal Reserve banknote. Here we go. Got it. All right. Federal Reserve banknotes. There is the 100. There is the 50. Small size Federal Reserve banknotes. $50 note. And you can see this one is from New York. They printed 636,000 of them. That's it. In a VG8, you're talking 110. In a VF20, it's 150. By the time you get the choice uncirculated, it's 250. Gem 65 is $650. Mine's pretty good. Mine's easily in that 150 range. Not quite 175, but 150, 160, I'm sure is the value on this particular one. And you can also see they didn't do it for every single reserve. At least for the 50, they didn't. There is no Boston listed. There is no Philadelphia. You can see that they just did not do them at every single one because they do not print a whole lot of 50s. You can see the average number here. I see 600, 600, 300, 100, 200. Let's compare that to the hundreds. Well, they didn't print that many hundreds either. Maybe a better comparison would be the 20s. Yeah, look at the 20s. 900,000, 2.5 million, 1 million, 1 million, 1 million. And they did all the different districts for the 20s. But the 50s, no, not really. They didn't print very many of those at all, which is why I like the 50s. So if you're thinking about getting older currency, like I said, the $50 denomination is a great way to go because they just don't print as many. That's also true for today. Even today, they don't print very many 50s. If someone needs a lot of cash, they're going to get hundreds. And if you break 100, it's very rare that you get a 50. More often than not, you're getting 520s. So since the 50 doesn't see a lot of use, they don't print a whole lot of them. It even goes to the extent that poker players consider 50s bad luck, and you won't see a poker player buying in with a $50 bill. I guess it goes that if a poker player is going to buy in for 100, they're going to use a $100 bill. And if they get stuck using a 50, it means they're probably down to their last few bucks. Anyway, that is the 1929 Federal Reserve banknote, the Frbn $50 bill. If you learned anything new this week, go ahead and hit that like button. If you like what you see and you want to see more, please subscribe. Love reading all your comments. Guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.